My topic is on food insecurity in Nunavut, with a focus on the Inuit. Food insecurity affects 8% of Canada's population, but almost 40% of people in Nunavut. I chose this topic because it has interested me for a long time. I've always wondered why what seems like a manageable issue elsewhere in Canada can continue to be a major problem more than 20 years after Nunavut's inception. After seeing photos of staggering food prices, where food can be an average of 4 times higher in Nunavut than in southern provinces, I wondered how the situation became so extreme and why the government has not done more to control the problem. In the literature review done, I found that much of the literature was about documenting food insecurity in Nunavut as well as its government solutions. My findings were pretty unanimous. Food insecurity in Nunavut was caused by poverty, transport costs, and climate change. These three factors affect Inuit more than anyone else in Nunavut. The solutions to help alleviate food insecurity were the Food Meal Program, which ran from 2004 to 2009, and the Nutrition North Program, which is still running and started in 2011. A lot of the literature I read discussed how food insecurity has grown as poverty rates have grown, and how the federal programs implemented have done little to actually solve the issue. I intend to contribute a study that explores how the government has been complicit in increasing food insecurity among the Inuit and how their solutions have failed to meet the needs of the Inuit communities adequately. The main theory I'm using to approach this topic is the theory of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is a facet of neocolonialism that relates closer to colonialism seen in expansion colonies such as the US, Australia, and Canada. This form of colonialism concerns itself more with claiming land to expand empires through means of displacement. Displacement can happen in many ways. First, through genocide, which is just killing those who are in your way. Secondly, through physically displacing people from desired land, such as reserves. And thirdly, through assimilation, which would be absorbing people into their way of living so that they are not conflicting with their space. From this theory, we can also see welfare colonialism take shape, which creates a dependency on colonial institutions such as the federal government to provide for communities so that they can make ends meet. These theories relate to food insecurity because many issues, such as determinants of poverty, experienced in Nunavut by Inuit are direct consequences of assimilation efforts championed by the government. There is a root to poverty created from the inception of neocolonial activity in Nunavut. Inuit already lived on the land before the government had gotten there. They lived off the land by hunting and gathering traditional food, which they call country food. To do this, they led semi-nomadic lifestyles, following food wherever it went and not settling too long in one place at a time. Military forces later arrived in Nunavut during the Cold War to establish the Distant Early Warning Line, or the DEW line, to defend against Russia, and with them they brought jobs and town-like environments. As climate change began to affect the availability of country food, it became larger wait times between successful hunts, and the Inuit began to take jobs with American whalers in the area so that they could buy store food. This began their transition from semi-nomadic lifestyles towards sedentary ones. Inuit started to mix the two lifestyles, hunting in the winter and working for wages in the summer. But during this time, many tensions began to develop between the Inuit and the government and the military. Sexual assault among Inuit women committed by white men rose. Alcohol-related convictions rose. Sled dogs were killed by the RCMP in retaliation for their unruly behavior. Children were sent to residential schools where they would be away from their families for years at a time, and lose their languages. And to combat some of these things, they included Inuit teachers in local schools to ensure that some traditions were being passed down, but there weren't enough Inuit teachers in the schools. Housing also was poorly constructed and quantities did not match growth rates of settlements, and jobs were not abundant. Food insecurity and poverty are directly related. To see how food insecurity rates become so high, one must look at how poverty is created in Nunavut. In Nunavut, they are also related to settler colonialism. The shift from being semi-nomadic to being sedentary inevitably causes transitional pain and traumas. Shifting to a market-dependent lifestyle when there are very little jobs does not allow for upward mobility, and poverty is generational. In my study, I chose to look at 3 determinants of poverty, but these are not exhaustive. I chose to look at housing, education, and employment. Housing is a complex issue in Nunavut. One major issue with housing in Nunavut is that there is still not enough of it. The growth of the population greatly outpaces the construction of houses. This can lead to two issues: overcrowding and homelessness. In overcrowded houses, the risk of health-related risks, education issues, psychological issues, and the risk of experiencing domestic violence all rise. These can affect one's ability to enter and perform in the job market, and that means they are more likely to experience poverty. Homelessness in Nunavut is different than in southern provinces as well. There's a hidden homeless who do not sleep on the streets due to the cold climate, but rather couch surf or sleep in closets because Inuit culture dictates that Inuit will not deny others shelter. The sense of togetherness in Inuit culture is huge. These are settler colonial issues. The government enticed Inuit to settle in Nunavut rather than live off the land by building subpar homes by housing standards and supplied cheap rent, but the repairs needed and the lack of safety to the homes meant that many would just suffer instead. This is an attempt to assimilate the Inuit that resulted in a poor housing market. Education levels will also impact poverty. In Nunavut, education levels are low for many reasons. One reason is due to generational trauma. Residential schools left a profound mark on those who attended and creates distrust in the education system that is passed down through generations. This can affect the completion rate of school. In addition, psychological effects experienced through the housing dilemma, such as depression, can affect school-aged children and increase suicide rates as well as completion rates of school. Another reason that education levels may be low is the lack of higher education. There are not many post-secondary schools in the Arctic in general, let alone in Nunavut. This means that students must travel south for education and be away from their families for long periods of time. This can be hard on students mentally, since the Inuit has a strong sense of family. This can also be impossible since many families rely on one income earner per household. The lack of post-secondary education means that the job market will be limited for Inuit students. And as discussed earlier, there's a lack of Inuit-focused teaching in schools, so traditional knowledge is not passed on as much, and hunting skills can be lost. Employment is one of the most obvious indicators of poverty, as one may most likely needs to be employed in order to escape poverty. As discussed, housing and education have a strong effect on Inuit employment options. Industries in Nunavut are already underdeveloped, with the majority of industries being government, construction, and mining industries. While government jobs pay well, they are not abundant, and often qualifications to be employed are not met by Inuit people because education levels are low. Construction and mining jobs pay well too, but this depends on your position. Oftentimes, high-paying jobs are reserved for people who are from outside the territory, and jobs that the Inuit get are lower skilled and lower paying. This means that many wage earners do not earn high wages on top of a high unemployment rate for Inuit compared to their non-Inuit counterparts. To combat food insecurity, the federal government executed two programs: the Food Mail Program and the Nutrition North Program. The Food Mail Program worked by providing a flat shipping rate for approved items. However, there were a multitude of issues with the Food Mail Program. Only certain stores were eligible. These stores already had a virtual monopoly over the industry, so there became an issue with transparency when allocating the subsidy back to consumers. Stores would raise their prices to counter the reduced prices. Sometimes the food brought up was not healthy, and this defeated the dietary needs of the subsidy, and items arrived in inedible condition sometimes as well. Prices for food also varied depending on the store and region. Changes were proposed to fix these issues, such as greater Inuit consultation, but ultimately the program was discontinued in 2009. Nutrition North replaced the Food Mail Program in 2011. This program subsidized the cost of food directly to the retailers. It also provided dietary knowledge to help Inuit choose healthier foods, and most of the recipients were majority Inuit communities, representing 25 of 77 eligible communities. However, issues still arise with this program. Food still does not arrive in edible condition. Inuit consultation is still lacking, so most of the food that arrives is Western food. Only food is subsidized in this subsidy, so there's additional burden placed on household items. Despite better transparency and proof that the subsidy is actually being passed on, food is still wildly expensive. While these programs did mostly what they said they were going to do, which is subsidize food costs, they do not alleviate food insecurity effectively. Finally, the other factor affecting food insecurity among Inuit is one that is not specific to Canada, but is being made worse by Canada, which is climate change. This affects Inuit abilities to hunt. Mainly this affects food supply, as ecosystems are further damaged, country food descends further south, and is harder to find, which necessitates a dependence on store food. The other effect this has is that Inuit hunters must adapt better, more accurate hunting equipment in order to hunt effectively and efficiently. And to do this, they need more advanced and expensive equipment. Knowing that poverty is already on the rise, this task is not as accessible and further stresses food insecurity among the Inuit. Food insecurity is not an easy fix in Nunavut. The contributors that make it worse among the Inuit cannot be eradicated in a day or even in a year. But a country that has the means should use them, ideally. More consultation with the Inuit needs to be done to solve this issue. A connection needs to be made with the problems created in the past that still persist in the future to exacerbate the issue. Governments of all levels cannot ignore their complicity in the issue through their history and lackluster solutions. Money through subsidies alone will not fix this issue.